Hi, I'm MrTieDye, and today we're going to do a flag tee. I've been talking about doing this for the 4th of July for a while now and realized it's the middle of June and figured I better get to it. So if you guys want to make 4th of July tees, you'll have some time to do it. So I'm going to show a couple different ways that I do the flag tee. The first way, I don't know how many of you guys have access to this, but I had some stars made. These are metal stars, and then I taped over them just because I don't want to get the rust spots on the t-shirt. But I had these made at a high school shop class. I just went in, talked to the shop teacher, and he basically made it an assignment for his students to cut out these stars. So they're not perfectly shaped. They're all, kind of a little bit off. Some of the points are different. But I got a whole bunch of these metal stars made that work for this clamping. So what I'm going to do to start with, I have a t-shirt that's been soaked in soda ash. It's been spun out so it's just barely damp, and I've centered it so I have the front and the back of the tee separated. That just helps for, when I scrunch up and do the lines down here, that's just going to help make them a little bit more even on the front and the back having the t-shirt. So that's just a nice way, and I will put a link to that down in the description below. So to start with the stars, I just kind of lay them out on the t-shirt where I want to have them. And the main thing, I'm going to clamp them with C-clamps. So you got to make sure that when you put this on here, you have enough room to get to that and clamp it. So like if I tried to put one all the way out here, that means I'd have to gather all of this t-shirt up to try to clamp that. So that could be a little bit more of a pain. So I usually try to lay these out, and we'll put that one underneath where I have a decent amount of room to get to it on the edges here. So, and we'll put one on the sleeve. We'll put one down here close to the armpit so we can go in right there. And let's see. We'll scoot that one down. I'm going to cut this off right here, right below the armpit. So the top part is going to be my blue, and then the bottom part is going to be my red and white stripes. So I just kind of position them around. I have 10 stars, so I'm doing 5 stars on the t-shirt, on the half t-shirt, which will be 10 stars, but sorry. Talking too much. Okay, so then I slide the other one underneath there, and I can feel and make sure that I got it lined up, and then just one by one I'll go along and clamp these down. And usually what I'll do once I get it almost all the way down here, well, I guess I could have tightened that up some before I put it here. Okay, so now before I tighten it down all the way, I'll loosen that up just enough, and I'll take some just thickened water or some regular water and squirt that a little bit underneath of the star. And what this is going to do is help keep the blue dye from seeping underneath the star. It's still going to happen a little bit, but if it's wet underneath the star with plain white water. My brain's not working this morning. With plain water, then it's not going to allow the dye to seep in. So as I position each one of these and tighten this down, I just try to make sure that I have the star lined up top and bottom. So I just kind of grab all 5 points here. The second way that I show how to do the flag tee will be one that doesn't require extra parts. So that will be next on this video here. So this one I'll tighten up a little bit here before I slide it under there. Using C-clamps, but you can, whatever you can find to clamp down, you can use the channel locks or just whatever works for you, whatever you happen to have around. But the main thing with this is you have to have the stars. So some of you can get these or make them, and the rest of you, there will be another flag method here at the end. And I guess you don't have to put the clamp, you can put a little bit of water on to start with there. That might be easier. Okay, so there's my stars, and in the bottom part, what I'll do is I just do an accordion fold straight across. I try to keep these all even, but sometimes it's difficult when you got these other things attached to it. But once you get that tied, then, or folded up, then I just tie it off with kite string, and I'll tie this nice and tight, because as I put my red dye on, I don't want it to seep all the way in, so that it will leave some white for me. So I do a nice tight tie on this with the kite string. Okay, there's the flag. I don't usually try to do any scrunching with this and tying this up, because it's going to be a pain lifting these up as it is. So I usually just leave those free flowing. So we'll go ahead and start putting dye on. For my flag tees, what I like to use is, I use both of them are for Dharma, but I use sapphire for my blue, and I'll usually add just a little bit of cobalt to it just to darken that up. And then I use fire red from Dharma for my red part here, and I usually will put just a few drops of this blue in there just to darken it up, give it a nice rich color. So what we're going to do here is just start squirting the dye on. And I'll usually dye the top part first, just because we got to get in and around all of these stars here. So sometimes I put water underneath each of the stars, but then I'll go along in each of the corners and just add just a little bit more water to them, and that's just going to help cut down on any of the dye seeping underneath of the stars, or limit it some. It's not going to stop it completely, but so just adding that little bit of water, that's going to start seeping in underneath the stars now, and then I can start putting my dye on. So I just kind of color t-shirt. I'll start in the open areas first, and I go right up to where I tied this at here. Leave just a little bit of a gap above the tie string there, but I want to let it kind of start to bleed on its own, so that when I put the red on, I'll leave a little bit of a gap and let it bleed up. And sometimes there'll be just a little bit of a white line, but other times those two will come just together nicely without really mixing too much. But it's a matter of putting the dye on and letting it do its own bleeding there. So I try to do that part first, and then I just go around all of the t-shirt and color around all the stars. Okay, got my gloves on, because now I'm going to have to start moving the t-shirt around and finding all my white spots on here. You don't have to dye all of them. Sometimes if you leave little bits of white in there, it just kind of adds to the effect of the flag. Okay, so there is my blue on the one side. I'm going to flip it over, but it's kind of a pain to flip, so I usually will get my red dye on next before I flip it. And for this, I'm just going to put just a light coat. I'm not going to try and tap it down inside or anything. And I left just a little bit of a gap so that red dye can spread a little bit on its own. So I just do just a light coat over top of this whole side, and it will leave some white down in the middle there. That's part of the reason why I tie it tightly, just to discourage it from seeping in all the way. And just one light quick coat is usually good for me. So that's something you'll have to just kind of play with, just how fast you apply your dye and how much of it. So you might do one of these before you do a whole bunch, just to make sure you have the process down for getting a nice bit of lines here. So we got that, and now I'm going to flip it over. And usually what I'll do is just try to grab some of these C-clamps, give it a flip, and then I sort these out a little bit. And then I'm going to start, once again, I'm going to put my blue on right here so it can start spreading while I dye the rest of the shirt. We'll put the red on, and once again I'm going to put the red all the way up there, but leave just a little bit of a gap so that it can spread on its own. And then just a nice light coat all the way along your creases. Make sure you have the dye wiped off of your hands before you start picking things up, because you don't want your blue and your red. And then once this dye has spread, then I'll go ahead and add just a little bit more and just kind of touch that up, bring that up close. But I still usually leave just a little bit of a white gap there. And then of course all of this here is dyed up. So that's going to be my flag tee, one of them. So we'll set this one aside. I'm going to let it batch for 48 hours and I'll wash it. And I'm going to come back and show you the other method for the flag. So hold on. Okay, so we're back with the flag tee. So this is the other way that I do it. I've prepped this tee the same way. It's been soaked in soda ash, spun out so it's barely damp, and it's been folded, centered. So I tucked one sleeve inside of the other, and I have a video for that, how I do it. That'll be in the description down below. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just tie some random dots. So you can draw these out however you like them. If you want to be precise, you can do that. But we're just going to do some random dots for our flag, for our stars. And then the way that I tie these is I just use kite string. I have a chopstick that I've kind of taped up just so it's padded. Usually I'll do these sitting where I can just sit on the couch and just rest this on my stomach or whatever. But basically I poke that underneath, and I'm going to do the front and the back of the tee. So I'm just poking that underneath. And I start out by just wrapping this around. In fact, I think the first one I do a little slip knot. So tie a slip knot in that. And I wrap that around the dot there. And then I just wrap it a couple times, pull that out, and pull this a little bit tight. So this is how I do. I've done several different orb designs, whether I do the whole t-shirt, I've done a yin yang, I've done a peace sign, I've done several different designs with this orb technique, and the flag is just one of them. So I just go along and just tie those up just like that, pull it tight, and you want to make sure you're not pulling these where all of the dots are right next to each other. So I kind of hold some tension as I pull the dot. But I just go along and I tie each one of these up with the kite string, and you can use kite string or dental floss or whatever you like. You could even use sinew if you like to. That would give you even more of a defined white circle. So now the rest of the shirt, I'm going to do the same thing. We're just going to accordion fold all the way across like we did on the other one. This one here is just a little easier because we don't have those big metal weights tying us down. Okay, now we're ready to get this dyed. So the first thing I do is I go along and I hit all of my white spots here with my dye, or I call it white dye. Really, it's just a little bit of thickened water, and that's just going to help keep the blue dye from soaking in there. So I just go along and saturate each one of these little nubs here. And then I go along with my blue dye. And this one here, I'm a little bit more careful to try to leave a little bit of space around each one of these and let the dye just slowly creep in on its own. The stars, I just went right up to them because you want to get those as solid as possible so that the star shape stands out. But this one here, since we have just the little circles we've tied off, they don't have to be perfectly dyed. So if there's just a little bit of a white space around that, then that will just add more to the white star effect. And then I also dye right across my line here. This time I've dyed a couple, or tied off a couple spaces here. So I'm going to dye halfway into that space there and let that blue dye creep, and then I'll dye my red dye right up to here and let it spread. Okay, now let's put some red on. We're going to do the same thing with the red that we did on the other flag tee. I'm going to leave just a little bit of a gap there. And then I'm just going to put just a light coat all the way along. I'm not going to try to soak it in deep because I want to leave some white in there. So I just go over, coat it one time. And then this one, you want to be very careful about flipping this over so that you avoid getting, I mean, it's going to happen, but I try to avoid getting as blue dye on that as possible. So when I flip this over, I'm going to reposition it and put the stars up here. And then I try not to move that around too much. And then I lightly coat on the other side. Once again, starting here between the red and the blue. And then I go over the back side of these, but you want to make sure you don't soak down in there too much, because this here is where all of the little nubs are. And if you put too much dye, then it's just going to drip straight through and into your star. So I do the same thing. I kind of go around them just a little bit here on the back side, but not squirting dye directly into the nubs. And then there's the other flag tee. I'm going to set this one aside, let it batch for 48 hours, and then I'll have the results of both flag tees at the end of the video. So in just a few seconds for you. Oh, and one more thing. I flip it back over so that all the nubs are pointing up, because I don't want the dye to slowly seep down into all of these. And then the other thing you can do is go along and put one more coat of dye. Oh, it looks like I already accidentally dyed one of the stars, but that's alright. So I just go along and just add a little bit more plain water to all of these little nubs or orbs, and that way they'll hopefully stay white. So thank you for watching. Please like and share my videos.